when I signed up for this, I said I was going to talk on the small craft harbor and Jones Park. Both of them have a lot of history and a lot of things that happened and a lot of things that made it hard for the city of Gulfport to set it up and operate it. After I wrote my paper the other day on the harbor, there wasn't time left to talk to y'all about Jones Park, so there's a lot of interest in litigation and everything else that had to do with that. And you know, I might come back to that someday if anybody wants to hear it. But after you get through here, I forgot to bring my speech that I read it off the wall, but so I'll speak from a little essay that I.
Can anybody hear her? You might need to move up a little bit or speak a little louder.
Okay. Back in 1944, my father bought a boat that was built in 1921 on the front lawn of a doctor in Biloxi. And that boat is still in the harbor and it still belongs to our family. And that's probably one reason I'm so interested in the harbor. Another reason, when I was city attorney for a long time and then did some work for it after all of that had to do with harbor. Gulfport actually buying the harbor. And so I have a special feeling for it, but I also feel that it is the gem of this city. Our harbor and park down there is the real gem of this city, the biggest attraction we have here. And a lot of times us residents don't think about it that way. This presentation might sound a little bit to you like I'm promoting Gulfport Yacht Club. I'm talking about the history, and there's a lot of interesting things in the early history. And if it hadn't happened, we'd have never gotten this harbor built. And some of them were coincidences, but most of them were leaders who were also sailors with the Gulfport Yacht Club. But it's not my intention here to promote the yacht club, though it might sound like it. I'm going to read, though, there was a book that was done for Gulfport Yacht Club that celebrated its 75-year anniversary, entitled Resolve to Sail, and it was presented back in 2014, something like that. And I'm going to quote a few things out of it because it really covers some of the early history stuff that I never knew and most people wouldn't have known. But I'm going to read first a quote from that book by Clayton Brand, who was a well-known editor and publisher of the Dixie Guide back in those days. And it shows kind of what the people involved felt like was necessary to build this city. This was a quote, 1936. "Give me a city with a soul where men united in the common cause have civic pride and build above themselves to the nobler life and higher peaks. A city purged of strife, of mean and little things, that we may grow in grace and great in fellowship and take wings to a glorious destiny as we work and play and dream and build." Of course, that was a dream back then, and maybe this harbor comes a little bit towards fulfilling that. Everybody knows about the revered father of Gulfport, Joseph T. Jones. He created the predecessor to Gulfport Yacht Club, and he was the Commodore there. And of course, Commodore is the title they give the yacht club presidents. Captain Jones was involved in practically every civic project at the time. One of his prominent sayings was, "I try to build, never to tear down." That's something we ought to always remember for our city. He felt that a well-respected yacht club could offer much to the city he was building. And he provided a big pavilion at the end of West Pier in Gulfport, which for the yacht club. You can see over here, this is what ran out to the end of this pier. It's where that pavilion was built. It had a trolley line, a walkway, a long way out to it. And you can see the great Southern Hotel in the background there. Back then, the club started holding sailing regattas off of the end of that pier, and it started drawing people from other areas with big boats, New Orleans and other places. And fortunately, that hotel there made a place for these residents to stay. We're told that they had women in long dresses and men in black ties that would walk around the trolley all the way out to the end of that pier to watch those races take place. Well, before too much time had gone by, the pavilion that Joseph Jones built caught fire and burned. And almost 20 years later, a group of sailors began racing off of a wharf to the west of that, and in front of where the Island View Casino is today. And the quote I'm reading again regarding them, it says, "Their love of sailing was contagious. Its effect on the city of Gulfport was nearly electric. The Gulfport Yacht Club soon found itself in a strategic position that impacted the very future of the coast in ways not even Joseph T. Jones had imagined. Even our Gulfport Mayor, Joseph Milner, became involved. The current yacht club grew out of this small group of sailors from back then, and they created a new yacht club in 1934, which was a successor to the original one. And I read where dues were $2 a year. and the membership expanded very quickly and very largely, and even brought people from Louisiana to join the yacht club. And at that time, peanut butter was 10 cents a jar, a pound of coffee was 19 cents, and a pack of cigarettes was 15 cents. But the organizers of that yacht club were really the movers and shakers of the city also. And you're probably wondering why I'm saying that the Gulfport Yacht Club in its early history has had an impact on this harbor. Well, I'm giving you mainly history stuff why I did. The original, after the yacht club was created, they had a purpose for the yacht club, and it was to promote aquatic sports, to develop further interest in such sports on the Gulf Coast. A more ambitious goal, however, reflected both a commitment to sailing and a larger vision for Gulfport on the part of early yachtsmen. It isn't much of a stretch to call them true coast visionaries. Their mission involved owning and operating boats, providing wharfs or piers, as well as judges' stands. By the end of 1934, yachting excitement was so big that the yacht club leaders knew it was time for the city to do something to help out, to have a place to protect boats, to dock boats, and to help out the people that would be using them. And old Dr. Orva Hopkins was the Commodore of the Yacht Club, and he took a big leadership role in this. He spoke to civic groups, labor groups, radio, in an effort to interest the community in building a municipal harbor. They were shooting from the west side of East Pier, west side of the port, and they were trying to build a harbor that had 22 docks and about 40 spaces. But as usual, politics failed and turned down the bond issue they were trying to pass to build it. But then, to everybody's surprise, one reason it was turned down is people wanted a bigger harbor, and they also had some influence from the Jones family that wanted it in front of the hotel, or closer to the hotel area. And so they were able to come up with a lot larger $350,000 bond issue in order to build a harbor like we have here. And how did they finance that? Now that was very interesting how they financed that. A new harbor came about with the assistance of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, better known as WPA, or Works Progress Associates. That was Roosevelt's attempt to deal with the crisis of high unemployment, and that was prominent during the Great Depression. And so we, fortunately, as we usually have in Mississippi, we had some legislators that had some influence, and bids to build it were funded by the WPA program. But there was a problem that they ran across. They didn't realize when the deadline was for WPA funding to be approved in Washington, D.C. And so the commissioners, city commissioners back then, two of them had to drive to Mobile, where Commodore Hopkins and some others were holding sailing in a regatta. And the reason they needed the yacht club was another problem with the WPA was they had to have a source of funding to look like they had a way of maintaining the project. Well, the only funding solution they could come up with was Gulfport Yacht Club paying rent for some offices and on the pavilion that was being built down there. And but with this deadline coming, these commissioners drove to Mobile. Commodore Hopkins held an impromptu board member of the Gulfport meeting of the Gulfport Yacht Club, and they approved a lease, to sign a lease, and the lease was then driven back hurriedly. And you need to give some credit to our Senator Pat Harrison of Gulfport. He got on a train with that lease on a Monday morning and got to Washington in time to barely make the deadline with that lease. And then it still wasn't over, but it took quite a bit of strong influence and negotiation by Senator Pat Harrison, and Senator Bilbo, and Representative Carr to finally get the funding by WPA approved. And after that, a dedication ceremony was held by the city for the harbor, but it was held in conjunction with the yacht club's holding the Lipton race on September 5, 1937. And it's quoted that Gulfport was the center of attraction on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, which was part of the headlines in the paper. There also was a note that I read that Biloxi actually filed a suit. I don't know how far they went with it, to stop Gulfport from getting any state taxes to help the project. They didn't want Gulfport, their rival city, to have that kind of a project. But, so that's the first conflict, and that's how we managed to get a port, which, like I said, is a gem. Second thing in history I just want to point out was in World War II, the U.S. Coast Guard took over the port and took total control over it, and the Coast Guard patrolled from the harbor in search of Axis submarines. It was the thought that both Japanese and German submarines were likely to use the unprotected beaches in the Gulfport area to come to the United States and try to take some stuff over. So, but the Coast Guard eased its control in 1942. Then everybody knows that the problem for all harbors in this area would be hurricanes. 1947 hurricane was the one. This was kind of the harbor when it was first built. The harbor was back there. And this was the pavilion. Well, 47 hurricane took that, took everything in the pavilion, took, docks and piers, and in some areas it said it had 12-foot waves that devastated the harbor. In some areas of West Beach, there were workboats on the shore north of the highway, even as a result of it. Only a few of us remember that hurricane. I was in the 4th grade at the time. But many people remember the next major hurricane that destroyed a good bit of the harbor, which of course was Hurricane Camille. I won't elaborate on it, but this harbor is well protected by the, I'm going to point out, I have a survey here. It has a name on it that says Cassidy, and I think I see a Cassidy in here. And I hung it upside down so you'd be looking at the exit to the harbor, the front of it. And of course, and this is the beach highway here, and of course this is 20th Avenue that goes around it. So all of this gives our harbor great protection, as well as, of course, the port and everything on the west side. And I think that's one reason our harbor holds up as well as it does. But when you have waves like you had at Camille, and 47 hurricane, well, you know what happens. But few of us can forget the August 29, 2005 Katrina. This storm brought the highest tides, the most crushing waves, and most turbulent backwash of any hurricane we ever had. And for docking purposes, it totally devastated the harbor. Remember, nearly every house on the beach was, if not was totally ruined, was in bad shape, and and most of the rears were washed back out to sea. But I got to mention that thanks again to our tenured congressmen, Senators Cochran and Lott, with their appropriation authority back then and influence, was able to appropriate about $45 million for Gulfport Harbor and some of that for the recreation part. And I should point out that there was much complaining of citizens of Gulfport about how long it took to rebuild that harbor. But I must say that Mayor Warren had the foresight, just as soon as the hurricane had calmed down, to have the city contract with Matthews Brothers to move every piling and every piece of pier, debris out of the harbor. Now, I can personally tell you that the harbor was so dilapidated at the time you couldn't nail a board onto the pilings, and it was in terrible shape and needed something. I guess if you have to talk about good things about a tragedy, that was one of them. With that $45 million, not only did he clear all of that out, where we have all new harbor pilings, many of them concrete, that are going to be there a long time, as long as any of us will ever remember. But not only that, the harbor was down to some places 3 and 4 feet depth. And so we also got the harbor dredged fully to 9 feet of depth. And so we have a harbor now that, as I said, is a real gem. You can look at recent storms we've had, that Hurricane Zeta. It wiped out all the piers in Long Beach Harbor, a lot of the piers in the Pascagoula Harbor. And our harbor master said we didn't lose one plank in Gulfport because $45 million enabled us to build it the right way. I'm going to talk now a little bit about Gulfport Harbor ownership, because things arose that hadn't been thought of back in those days. Title issues negate the city's claim of clear title and ownership to the water bottoms inside the harbor basin. Same problem that many landowners have. But we didn't have those problems until the mid-80s or so, because nobody talked about titles. But we claimed ownership of the harbor before that as a result of the Illinois Central Railroad. This down here, this is the beach highway. This is what Grace Jones Stewart donated to us. I'll talk about that some other time. It has reversionary covenants and things. But the city leased from Illinois Central Railroad, they claimed back then that they owned water bottoms, land, and everything. It's in this blue area all the way out to Channel and all the way around. And Gulfport had to lease that from the lease was, let's see, was a 40-year lease from 1936 to 1986. And the city, of course, subleased Marine Life, Shipyard, and Gulfport Yacht Club during the time of this lease. Illinois Central informed us just prior to 1983, when the lease was running out, actually it was in 1981, that when it terminated, unless the city would buy that property from them, our lease would terminate. Of course, if our lease terminated, our lease sublessees would lose their property too. Well, what happened was, back then, the then Mayor Jack Barnett actually once again hired yours truly to negotiate. Gulfport only had $400,000 available, and that was from community development money. They hired me and told me, Mayor Barnett did, what you need to do, you got 5 months to do it, is raise the rest of the money. So, and do it by selling to these other entities. And the railroad agreed to a price of $1 million, provided that the city would do it by March 30, 1981. Well, I don't know why he picked me out to do this, but anyway, I had the first thing I had to do was hire a guy named Clark, James Clark, because he had done some surveying in the area to survey the whole thing, and then to survey the individual parcels that we were going to have to sell. And then I had everything appraised. And then I had to negotiate these purchases with these various entities. And sure enough, the last date that we could buy it for $1 million was that March 30, 1981. And March 30, 1981, these entities came through with the negotiated purchase prices. And I gave them deeds and paid off the Illinois Central Railroad, who gave us a deed to it. And of course they claimed everything, water bombs and everything, so we did too after that. But, and let's see, Gulfport Yacht Racing Association paid $250,000. Marine Life paid $187,000. Mississippi Coast Marine $111,000. The port bought a little piece of strip for $15,000. The next thing that came about was the Coast Guard. Jack Barnett and Senator Lott were very interested in the Coast Guard was getting ready to build a station for search and rescue purposes. And it was either going to be Gulfport, Mobile, or Pensacola. Barnett wanted it in Gulfport, and Trent Lott was going to help him get it. And so they negotiated it, but and this is the Coast Guard station here. But the Coast Guard required this little piece here, which was in the Jones Park area, which had reversionary rights, and we couldn't give a clear title to it. So once again, Barnett sent me up to Washington to talk to the heir up there and try to get a release from the reversionary covenants. And somehow, by promising to do special things with some of the money we were getting, they agreed to that. And so this Coast Guard station got free and clear title for $600,000, and they're operating a very big-time safety rescue facility here now. And so, what else is a problem with the port? Well, this is where the tideland stuff comes in. The city of Gulfport, exercising the ownership, possession, and everything of the small craft harbor, all the adjoining properties around it, came into question. Based upon old common law and dating back to Mississippi's becoming a state in 1817, the U.S. Supreme Court in 1988 held that the state owns in trust for the public all land subject to the ebb and flow of the tide up to the line of mean high tide, which is average high tide. Well, sometimes you have to look back to 1817 to try to determine that. And then in 1989, the state legislature adopted the Mississippi Public Titles Act of 1989, which pretty much codifies that common law. And not only are private individuals, as you know, many landowners are prohibited from selling any land that may be attached to theirs that can be classified as titles. The state governing authorities can't do it either. Now the city does have the right to hold, maintain, control, and operate the harbor and abutting lands under the Small Craft Harbors Act, provided they're doing it open to the public and is for the higher and best use of the higher public purpose of operating a public harbor. And so the tidelands issues, there are many issues, or many cases about is this tidelands or is it not? But I can't go into all of that. I could settle it anyway. The courts and the lawyers haven't settled it yet. It's still going on in various cities around here now. But in Mississippi, the Secretary of State has the fiduciary duty to protect public recreation and other purely public uses from the tidelands, which has resulted in many controversies. The state lease money he leases these tidelands to whoever's using them, the majority landowner that's using them, and those monies are appropriated by the legislature supposedly for the recreational purposes, and it's usually for the coastal recreation purposes. Now, even though Gulfport purchased lands, financed and built the harbor and all of its access streets, infrastructure, docks, piers, and amenities, rebuilt them again and again after devastating storms, and maintained them for public recreational use ever since the 30s. Secretary of State Delbert Hoseman in 1914 demanded that the city of Gulfport enter into a lease of the entire harbor, including the lands around it, claiming all of it to be tidelands. Well, although at that time I had retired as city attorney, they came back to me to help the then city attorney, Jeff Rooney, and we filed a suit. We filed a suit against the state to stop the enforcement of a lease, and we claimed that his enforcement of this lease to all of this property was a slander of the title to some of our properties and some other things. Anyway, both the state and the city had very strong legal arguments here. And the problem being, we were in the process of rebuilding after Hurricane Katrina, and we already had monies appropriated. But this continued litigation could tie up any of these projects for years and years during the litigation. And fortunately, we were able to get the cases settled in a way that I think was very satisfactory to the city, and yet recognized what titles are. And I'm just going to tell you the status of the harbor now with regard to the law. The settlement involved 3 documents which are strongly in effect, and if they're violated, we could be in trouble again. But one of them was a use agreement. Now, the use agreement declares the bottom lands, and those are the lands submerged on mean high tide, which on the inner harbor basin itself. And also the water under the piers, Uri and Moses Pier out front there, to be titles, and there's no way to get around it under the status of the law today. But Gulfport was granted the use, the management and maintenance of the harbor and the bottoms, as long as it was being used for recreational purposes and for operating a public harbor. Gulfport owns all the docks, piers, launch ramps, infrastructure, and other improvements. In the use, the city, is restricted that it will not impede a member of the general public from accessing or using the harbor, waterfront, fishing piers, sand beach, and will not detrimentally affect the beauty of the beach area. Another restriction is any plans for building any permanent structures in the harbor basin itself will require approval by the state, to the Secretary of State. Revenues from the boat slip rentals, Gulfport retains all of those, but they're required to be applied to the maintenance, cost of repair, debt service of the harbor facilities itself. Now, the term of this use agreement was 40 years, which will end November 30, 2053. But if the city is in compliance at that time, the city will have the unlimited right to extend it for another 25 years, so you pretty much have a permanent situation that's pretty good. The second thing, which was really important and good for the city, is a boundary agreement that the state and the city entered into. The boundary lines that the Secretary of State agreed to declared all lines above mean high tide, which includes all the street and land areas around the harbor, to be outside of tidelands. Before that, he was claiming it was all tidelands dating back to the old days, but now it's no longer tidelands, and it's declared not to be so by the state. And the front beach between Uri and Moses Piers, we actually got them to let us survey that and agree that everything in that survey that was determined to be above mean high tide was not tidal, so we kind of control the beach too. However, that's always subject to tidal wash, accretion, and could increase or decrease according to that. So that boundary agreement was good for us. Then the last thing we had to agree to do, which really is good for the citizens of Gulfport, is we had to make a perpetual dedication of the entire harbor area for public park, as a public park use. This dedication is in perpetuity, and it will survive any of these other agreements. The lands were dedicated by the mayor and council as a perpetual public park for the benefit of all citizens, independent of these other documents. And there are some things that you can do and can't do under this dedication. Of course, the public will have right of use and access and enjoyment. The city is not allowed to sell or convey any part of it other than it was allowed to convey to the Gulfport Redevelopment Commission back then, who could make some leases, but if it was ever trying to be sold, then it would revert to the city. Now, certain types of leases in the park area are prohibited. Gaming, no boarding or residential development, no private office space that isn't for harbor and park services, and any violation of sale of alcohol, violation of state laws, not allowed. Beverage and package stores aren't allowed. There's some things that are allowed. The support for leases that support provisions and facilities, being also allowed in market sales of farm and seafood products, restaurants, entertaining events such as fishing rodeos, arts and craft shows, music entertainment, that type of thing. And the cities are allowed to charge reasonable fees for that, even though it's public opportunity. Space used for operation and boarding of commercial and charter fishing is allowed to be leased, or excursion in the Highland Ferry and certain charter vessels. Now, one thing that hadn't been done but is allowed is overnight lodging, but it's only limited to guest rooms that don't exceed 24,000 square feet of the property, and it's used to promote public and tourism uses of the park and the harbor, but not for never for extended boarding. That's kind of the status of the harbor today. I think what we ended up with, though, is what the city would intend to use it, whether or not we had all that litigation or not. And I just hope my legal talk didn't put everybody to sleep.